Goblins, the favorite fantasy creature on everybody's governmental watch list. Goblin Slayer jokes aside, today I wanna take a look at how a realistic Goblin Kingdom would work and why it would be more or less akin to the Death Korps of Krieg. But before we take a look at all of this, I have made a full-length companion video about what the Goblin Kingdom of Overlord looks like, so check it out, it's linked down in the video description. And now back to the realistic Goblin Kingdom. Now first and foremost, the Goblin Kingdom would have peasant farmers who produce food. They would have knights or some other sort of military class or soldier class. They would have a religion or religions, merchants, bandits, and most people of the state would, like in many other nations, just be citizens. But here's the thing, goblins breed like rabbits, and the reason why rabbits breed like rabbits is the very simple fact that they are prey animal. Everything wants to eat the rabbit, foxes, eagles, snakes, and of course, nature's cruelest predator. A bipedal monkey species known as humans also like to munch on them on occasion. Now, this is something nature accounts for by making them very fertile, to the point that if 1 out of 10 rabbits can procreate, it's an astonishing success. And in places like Australia, of all places, they dominate the server. I watch too much Tierzu. Jokes aside, the fact that Australia of all continents is overrun by a runaway petting zoo, despite it literally being Australia, the place where trees coat themselves in oil to be extra flammable, should really make you think, and this is because they have less predators in Australia. Now imagine what happens to the goblins and their population, who know that their only strength is pretty much strength in numbers, when they establish a realm that has some semblance of internal peace. Not as in there's no pestilence or hunger or crime, but just so that the majority of goblins, not all of them, just the majority, 51% of them, can grow up to become adults. Then the realm would quickly suffer from overpopulation. And here's the thing, there are only 2 ways to lower this population back down to sustainable levels. Either by directing the surplus into more internal causes, aka a civil war over food, land and other resources, or, and this would be what most Goblin Kingdoms would choose, focus the enormous amount of young, able-bodied goblins outwards into conquering new lands and territories, thereby simply enabling the kingdom to expand further. Acquire more land to feed more goblins, produce more offspring, and field bigger armies. In order to conquer more lands, feed more goblins, and build even bigger armies. You see what I'm getting at, right? A goblin realm that manages to establish itself would become, if it stays unified and doesn't tear itself apart over resources, which is a real possibility, but still, it would snowball into a green tide, an unstoppable force of troops that would set out to conquer new lands, establish new farms, have kids of their own, give the farm to the strongest of the 30-odd kids, marry some off, and send 1 or 2 to becoming priests or something like that, and have the other 20 go out into another war, to repeat the cycle. And here's the thing, a realistic species that forms a civilization and that is used to being a small, weak and protectionless prey animal on their own, might come to the conclusion that even reaching adulthood is a gift and reward enough for an entire life, rather than it being something that just every goblin should naturally being able to do so. So the goblins would be incredibly collectivist and cohesive in this regard, and would have a very high tolerance for the loss of life. Their religion that would form around these bases would be all about one sacrifice. How surely reaching adulthood at the ripe old age of 7 means you had lived a better life than your ancestors could have ever hoped to. Surely now it is the time to go out in some of the wars your realm is currently fighting and just die there, in order to repay your debt to society. 19 people will die, so that the 20th then can actually live at the place that had been conquered. This would be basically the religious creed, how their society works to constantly expand outwards, not by being a heroic solo fighter, but by dying in masses. Their society would also probably fully expect them to die. Once, for example, you sign up for the military service, or rather just not exempt from it, maybe the 20 that go to war will actually be given a funeral in their very own presence, including a last meal and everything, before getting a sharpened rod of wood and a tiny and rather thin shield as their equipment, along with the best wishes and maybe a fire and a feast in their honor before marching towards the front line. And they would think and assume that at least if the Goblin Kingdom is stable and they are properly indoctrinated, that their sacrifice is necessary and something natural, something to be desirable, something that furthers the greater good of all goblin kind. And the greater the sacrifice, the bigger the reward the goblin would receive in the afterlife. Maybe the priest promised that an entire valley would just be their own for eternity. Maybe it's a perfect utopia they are painting, where roasted chickens flying directly into your mouth, where rivers are of milk and honey, where the trees are made of fruits and chocolate and everything else sweet and desirable, if they can just endure the hardship in this life. And maybe the land will always stay empty to some sort of divine blessing, so that they can always have kids and further their bloodline without any problem at all. This would be their goblin heaven. So, a goblin army simply by their ability to not only take but downright demand and need tremendous losses from 19 out of 20 to simply be stable in size would be a truly apocalyptic threat. Not a dragon, not a spell, but simply a goblin kingdom that has secured itself, that has stabilized itself, and that now is expanding outward, could snowball into an incredible threat to all civilized life, and indeed all life on the planet. Because no matter how strong the human hero, no matter how mighty the dragon, the goblin will always be more, and eventually you will collapse under the sheer amount of attrition. You would be too tired to fight, while hordes upon hordes of goblins would stream forth and attack you. So, this would be a really interesting scenario for a story and a horrible grindy idea for any video game. And with that said, I say thank you very much for watching. Be sure to check out my video about the Goblin Kingdom in Overlord, and as always, have a nice day.